stand. Spirit of Jesus, open our hearts to live and to love the gospel of the Lord.
Heart to Heart, a Catholic media ministry, presents an inspiring gospel reflection by Father Michael Sparrow. Father Michael is a Jesuit priest working as a writer and retreat master at the Bellarmine Jesuit Retreat House outside Chicago.
Jesus went away to the district of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that region came out and started shouting, "Have mercy on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer her at all. And his disciples came and urged him, saying, "Send her away. She keeps shouting after us." He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and knelt before him, saying, "Lord, help me." Jesus said, "It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." The woman replied, "Lord, even the dogs get to eat the scraps that fall from the master's table." And Jesus answered, "Woman, great is your faith. Great is your faith. Let it be done to you as you wish." And at that moment, the woman's daughter was healed. The Gospel of the Lord. Today's Gospel is perhaps one of the less familiar scenes in the Gospel of Matthew. And I think it takes just a little background study to understand exactly what's going on. It begins by stating that Jesus goes to Tyre and Sidon, which is outside of the normal Jewish territory. Jesus is going into pagan territory. Now, he's not going there on a mission of evangelization, as the gospel today makes clear. Jesus states the focus of his mission: "I'm sent to the lost children of the house of Israel." But this gospel serves as a prelude to what would be the ministry of St. Paul, extending the Christian faith to all the nations of all the world, that theme that is picked up in the first reading from the prophet Isaiah. But Jesus states, "My focus right here, right now, is to the children of Israel." As God, his heart is open to all people. As a limited human being, he's got to start somewhere, and he starts with the Jews. So he's not stepping outside the Jewish territory on a mission of evangelization. Why is he there? Well, scholars speculate that he's regrouping. He's taking a little time off. He's gathering his disciples, because from this point on, Jesus is going to be entering into some very significant theological clashes with the scribes and the Pharisees, a movement that will ultimately lead him to the cross of crucifixion. And in this pagan territory, a Canaanite woman comes up. Who were the Canaanites? They were the original dwellers in the land. If this took place in America today, you'd say she was a Native American woman. And she had obviously heard about Jesus as an amazing healer, because she comes up with great faith, great persistence, and begs him to heal her daughter, who is tormented by a demon. We don't know exactly what the nature of that torment is, but we know that it was sufficient to bring her outside of her comfort zone, not to be put off by the disciples who were just saying, "Get rid of her, she's a nag." she continues to ask for what she wants. Now, there's something problematic in this text, isn't there? And it's Jesus' statement of it's not right to take the food of the children of Israel and throw it to the dogs. What's going on there? Certainly, that statement cannot be accepted at face value because it flies in the face of everything that Jesus stood for, which is love, compassion, mercy, tolerance. I think we have to see this as a verbal repartee. And my own interpretation of the text is that Jesus is taking the common attitudes of so many of the Jews of his time, of these Canaanites. They're not even human. They're just like dogs. Now, she isn't even a man. She's just a woman. And she's not a Jew. So the common mindset of many of the Jewish men of that time would be, she's just a dog. Jesus takes that slur and puts it before the woman and says, in so many words, this is what many of my counterparts think of you. The woman knows exactly what's going on. She sees the glint of light in Jesus' eyes. She sees a little bit of the smile in the corners of his mouth, and she comes right back. She meets the challenge. Even the dogs get to eat the scraps from their master's table. Full smile, and instantly Jesus responds, you got it, sister. Great is your faith. She meets the challenge. The test is passed. And what happens then? Her daughter is instantly healed, delivered from this demon. It's an extraordinary scene, isn't it, of Jesus once again crossing those cultural boundaries within his own society, talking to a woman publicly, talking to a Canaanite woman, and granting her her heart's desire. We hear this gospel today in the context of the events that transpired on Saturday, August 12th, when white supremacists violently attacked protesters marching against them in Charlottesville, Virginia. A 20-year-old man, James Alex Fields, allegedly rammed his car into a crowd of people, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer and injuring at least 19 others. In the ensuing chaos, 2 state police officers also died while monitoring the protests after their helicopters crashed. What these events demonstrate, unfortunately, is that racism is alive and well and is in fact growing within our own country. We are, as a nation, of people who talk about the American dream, are we not? What is that American dream but economic prosperity for people from all over the world being able to come to America and make a better life for themselves? America, the great melting pot, that no matter what the color of your skin, no matter what your religion is, no matter who your ancestors were, you are welcome to come and to join us together in building a great nation, united by a common love for our people. I don't think we can talk about the American dream without at least hearing the echoes of that great speech by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., which has a special poignancy, I think, in the events that have transpired on August 12th and where we find ourselves as a nation today. Dr. King said, I have a dream. Let us not wallow in the valley of despair. I say to you, my friends, today. And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. Let's acknowledge that the events in Charlottesville challenge that dream. Let's acknowledge that we have a long history of racism within this country, and that even though many who profess themselves to be Christian and many of them who profess themselves to be Catholic still harbor great racial hatred within their hearts. So many of the members of the Ku Klux Klan within this country were Christian. So many of the Nazis in Germany that practiced mass extermination were Christians, many of them Catholics. We saw the horrendous genocide decades ago in Rwanda of the slaughter of the conflict between the Hutus and the Tutsis. And so many of them were Christians and many of them Catholics. We certainly, as Catholics, stand together in condemning violence in whatever form, even when it's perpetrated against our so-called enemies. Violence at an abortion clinic is no excuse. We stand against abortion, but we don't show that we stand against abortion by bombing an abortion clinic or hurling epithets of hate against those who have abortions. Dr. King said, "I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood. I have a dream that our children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. I have a dream today." Brothers and sisters, what is our dream for America today? The bishops of our country have come together in condemning the violence at Charlottesville. Our own Bishop Supage wrote, "When it comes to racism, there is only one side, and that's to stand against it." Cardinal DiNardo, in his full statement on behalf of the Bishops' Conference, as president of the Bishops' Conference, wrote, "On behalf of the bishops of the United States, I join leaders from around the nation in condemning the violence and the hatred that have now led to one death and multiple injuries in Charlottesville, Virginia. The abhorrent acts of hatred on display in Charlottesville are an attack on the unity of our nation, and therefore summon us all to fervent prayer and peaceful action. The bishops stand with all who are oppressed by evil ideology and entrust all who suffer to the prayers of St. Peter Claver as we approach his feast day. We stand ready to work with all people of goodwill for an end to racial violence and for the building of peace within our communities." Pope Francis, in his apostolic discourse, his first official writing, The Joy of the Gospel, said, "Of course there is a political dimension to the gospel. What we practice here today cannot stand inside the church. We hear these words of Scripture, we join together, we sing our songs, we hear these sermons, we gather at the table of life to be transformed as individuals, as a people of faith, as a city, as a state, as a nation, as a world." In the words of our first reading from the prophet Isaiah, our God is a God of all of the nations who calls us to change our ways. Let's acknowledge, brothers and sisters, that many of us are silently complicit in the sin of racism within our country. That we live here in Chicago, which is one of the most racially divided cities in our nation. It's a city that is sorely beset by violence. We cannot stand silent in the face of this hatred. The Christian ethicists without border have penned a very powerful statement which my own Jesuit provincial, Father Brian Paulson, has signed. They call us there beyond words. They say we need to contemplate and respect the image of God imprinted on each human being. We need to work across religious traditions to come together to reflect on ways that we all have been complicit in upholding and benefits from the sins of racism and white supremacy. We need to pray for the strength and the courage to stand emphatically against racism, white supremacy, and nationalism in all its forms. To participate in acts of peaceful protest, including rallies, marches, and at times even civil disobedience. We cannot remain passive bystanders in the face of the heresies of racism, white supremacy, and white nationalism. We have to engage in political action to oppose structural racism in all of its forms. A story of hope. Perhaps you've heard on the radio airwaves, or you read in the Tribune just the other day of a former white supremacist, former American Nazi by the name of Christian Piccolini. He's a native Chicagoan. He's now in his 30s. He's a former skinhead who experienced a profound conversion. He documents his story in the book Romantic Violence, Memoir of a Former Skinhead. And he's now become a co-founder of a peace advocacy group called Life After Hate. Reflecting on his own journey toward violence and then out of violence, he described himself being lured into the movement as a lonely, lost, angry teen. That's where his hatred began as a teenager. He was lured in through the internet and through one-on-one contact, and seeing all of the problems of his life as being projected onto others, especially Jews, blacks, people of color. He learned to hate, and he became violent, and he recruited others. He became a leader in this movement in America. What turned him around? He said there were 3 incidents. The first one, he and a group of his white supremacist skinhead buddies came into McDonald's, and there were a bunch of African Americans there, and they had been drinking too much. And their anger flared up. They taunted them. They drove them outside the McDonald's. They said, "This is our McDonald's. The likes of you have nothing to do here." They drove them outside, and then when they were outside, they proceeded to beat them to a pulp. As he smashed the head of this one young African American whose face became bloated and bloodied beyond human recognition, as he stood there kicking his face repeatedly again and again and again, the black man looked up at him and they made eye contact for just a moment. He said when he looked into his eyes, he saw that man that he hated violently as a human being, and it touched him to the core. He ignored that. It didn't change his life instantaneously, but he couldn't shake that memory of seeing that man's eyes like slits from the bloodied mass that he had been kicking. The second event that shook him to the core was the birth of his own child. As he held that little baby in his arms and he reflected on what he wanted for this child, the kind of country he wanted for this child. He felt his own heart swelling with love. And there was something more powerful than hate. Prior to that point, his life had been defined by hate. At this moment, he felt his heart opening up and an invitation to define his life by love, not by hate. The third incident that was most decisive was he opened a record store to sell white supremacist, neo-Nazi music, much of which he transported from different places around the world, especially from Europe. And he sold it to his fellow skinheads. But it wasn't enough to be able to support himself. So he came up with a clever plan. He said, I'm going to sell R&B hip-hop music to the people I hate. And they won't know that when I'm taking their cash, I'm looking at them and I'm filling my heart with hate. But as the African Americans came in to buy music that they loved, something happened that shocked him. They treated him with dignity. They treated him with respect. They didn't look on him as the enemy. They looked on him as a friend. The music was bringing them together. That shattered his life experience. Because the people that he had hated, he had never had meaningful encounters with. And here he was engaging in dialogue back and forth with these people who showed nothing but love and respect to him. He had enough integrity to say, I have to let go of the rhetoric. I got to change my life. And change my life he has, as he's formed this advocacy group called Life After Hate. Brothers and sisters, an extraordinary example that none of us are beyond the reach of God's grace. If our worship today means anything in the church, it means that God is never through with us. And he's not through with us as individuals, and he's not through with us as a nation. We have a choice to say, is the American dream dead or is it alive? Let me close with those powerful words once again of Dr. King. With this faith, this Christian faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, becoming what only God can bring about, knowing that we will be free one day. And this will be the day when all God's children will be able to sing with new meaning, my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride, from every mountainside, let freedom ring. Amen.
Heart to heart, hand in hand, praying for grace to understand. Spirit of Jesus, open our hearts to live and to love the gospel